Hello, my name is Joe and welcome to my channel. Today I want to talk about my reading report for February of 2025. I matched my numbers for January, which was 10 books. I also read 10 books in February. I didn't think that was going to happen, but let's go ahead and just get right down into it. By the way, with each of these, I will be giving a Goodreads rating, and I pretty much match or follow the Goodreads guide on the star ratings. 1 star means I did not like it. 2 stars means it was okay. 3 stars means it was good. 4 stars means I really, really liked it. And 5 stars, I guess, means I really, really, really liked it. So let's go ahead and get started. The first book, and I've been excited to talk about this, is The Raven Prince by Elizabeth Hoyt. Now, some of you, and since I read this on my Kindle, I'll put it up on one side. For a male reader, I that might be a little bit surprising that I wanted to read this. But last year I read, for the first time, 2 Jane Austen novels. I read Pride and Prejudice, which I really enjoyed, and Emma, which I did find it was a little bit of a struggle for me to get through. And I've wanted to kind of just see what a modern historical romance was going to be like. Now, of course, Jane Austen, she's writing in kind of a contemporary romance, but historical romances, I think it's probably fair to say that you can trace them back to Jane Austen. Now, I know Steve Donahue says if you want to get into romances, start with Jane Austen, and then you slowly work your way forward. I just went ahead to the 21st century, and I wanted something that I knew was going to be, let's just be honest, sexually explicit. I just wanted to see how that was going to work with something that can be traced back to Jane Austen. What did I think of it? I rated it 3 out of 5 stars. Overall, I liked it. I thought it was good. I will say that the first half of the novel was better than the second half. And I will have to go into spoilers here. There's no way I can talk about this without spoiling it. The main character, Anna, gets a job working for this Earl Edward, who's kind of a jerk. But they have this attraction, and she becomes his secretary. And she's a widow, he's a widower. They are attracted to each other but don't really like each other. And it turns out that Edward likes to frequent a brothel in London. And Anna decides, and this is where kind of this modern, maybe not so realistic element comes in regarding the sexuality. She's going to liberate herself, and she's going to go to London, and she's going to pose as one of the prostitutes and spend a night or two with Edward. And I will say, the build-up to that was very good. It was kind of shockingly good. I was really surprised. It's interesting because the humor in the first half, it does remind me of Jane Austen. And maybe that's because, this is the third romance I've ever read, or at least the third. This isn't Regency. This is Georgian romance. This is the third historical romance I've ever read, if you count Jane Austen as historical romance. And so I have nothing else to compare it to, so of course it's going to seem similar to Jane Austen. But it really did in the first half. The comedy of it just reminded me of Jane Austen. And then when you get to that middle portion when she's at this brothel and this explicit sexual encounter happens, and then the next night happens again, and it's even more filthy. It's kind of interesting. And usually I think sex scenes in books, a lot of times they're boring. It's like, why are we reading this? This was like an action scene. It had tension. It was electric. I will say in the second half, there are more sex scenes, and then they become like every other sex scene. It's like, all right, do we have to read about this? Okay. And I will say that their relationship becomes more defined by their encounters, their romantic encounters, and that interesting dynamic that they had in the first half of the novel isn't really as present in the second half. But overall, I thought it was good. It was filthy. I will say, as you can see, I'm again putting this up on the screen here. I read this on my Kindle. I will admit, I don't think I can, as you can see on the cover, I cannot read these books out in public. I have to read this on my Kindle. I hope you can forgive me, but I don't have a problem if someone asks me, "Hey, what are you reading?" I'll flat out tell them. It's fine. But yeah, I'm glad I checked it out, and you can broaden your horizons a little bit. The next book, something completely different. It is the first book in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series by Matt Dinniman. I rated this 3 out of 5 stars. Overall, now that's a middle of the road rating, but I really enjoyed this book, and as you'll see, I've read more of these books, and I'm enjoying them quite a bit. Dungeon Crawler Carl is what's known as a LitRPG. If you're not involved in like the more polished professional fantasy side of BookTube, you might not have heard this term before. What this subgenre is essentially it's characters that go into like a game world, and the fantasy story involves them playing this kind of real life video game. In Dungeon Crawler Carl, it's this maybe not intergalactic, but this alien empire comes. They flatten the surface of the planet Earth, kill most of humanity, and the surviving humans are given the opportunity to descend in these portals and descend into this video game-like dungeon that goes deeper and deeper into the earth. And they can get like they have stats. They're literally playing like a live action video game where they can bring up a menu. They can look at their strength stats, their intelligence, their wisdom, etc. So if you've ever played an RPG video game, a lot of this will kind of seem familiar for you. And it's interesting. They even have inventories like the main character Carl. If he holds a book in his hand, he can hold the book and zap it into his inventory. He is accompanied by not his cat, his girlfriend's cat, Donut, who pretty early on in the story, this isn't a big spoiler, she eats this like magical biscuit and she gains the ability to talk. And she actually is the true party leader when they form their party. So the book is really entertaining. The first novel has this great like novelty factor. If you've never read a LitRPG, and what I've heard is this is probably one of the best written ones. So it gives you a great introduction to the subgenre. I've heard that this subgenre is very addicting, and even though I think maybe it's not the most well written piece of writing, it is a lot of fun. It's addicting. I've read 3 of these this month. I will say, speaking of the writing, one flaw I have is there's a lot of exposition. There's like a game guide character that joins Carl and Donut, the cat. And he kind of explains the rules of the game and explains, how they can level up and as they, descend further into the dungeon. And that can get a little bit tedious sometimes. The outside world, though, so this game that they're playing is essentially televised, and these aliens are watching it, and as they get deeper into the dungeon, they get more and more views. Carl and Donut, it turns out that they're pretty good at playing this death game. Oh, by the way, if they lose, they die, of course. And when they start to, this kind of gets more important in the later books, which I'll talk about, but it's a lot of fun when they get invited onto these talk shows in between levels, and they have to do these television appearances, and they have to kind of play along for the camera, because if they get more views, they could get more loot boxes, and they get sponsorships. So the outside world is one of the most interesting aspects of this. I will say the descriptions of the dungeons themselves, especially in the first book, are a little bit lacking, and the exposition sometimes can get a little bit tedious. But other than that, it's 3 out of 5, but it's really entertaining. If this subgenre sounds interesting, check this one out. Next up, I wanted to read, in between my Dungeon Crawler Carl books, I wanted to read Clive Barker's The Hellbound Heart. This is a movie that I actually got the chance to see in the theater a few weeks ago, or I guess right before I read this. And I decided, well, I'll buy it on my Kindle, and I'll check it out. I don't have too much to say about it. I love the movie Hellraiser, also directed by Clive Barker. His prose is, I think, phenomenal. He's a very good writer. If you like Hellraiser, check this out. Hellraiser is a very good adaptation of this book. Don't have too much more to say about it, but if you're a horror fan and you've just kind of read Stephen King and want to read something a little more extreme and getting into what's considered possibly splatterpunk, check this one out. Next up is Matt Dinniman's Carl's Doomsday Scenario. This is, of course, Dungeon Crawler Carl number 2. And this one, I think, though the novelty factor has maybe worn off in the series, the world itself in this level, we actually get down to level 3 in book 2, I think is better. It's a more interesting fantasy-themed world in this level of the dungeon, and it has an excellent and very exciting and interesting finale. There's a big final boss. Well, it's not really a big final boss. There's this final scenario that they have to do, and it's pretty cool. Same criticism applies. It does get a little bit tedious, some of the exposition. But this one overall, I think this one, of the 3 that I read this month, this one's probably the best. Still rating it 3 out of 5, but it's a strong 3 out of 5. Next up, and you can see, I actually do have a physical copy of this, but I'm going to put the image up, and as you can see, it's censored. The artwork is very interesting, but definitely not safe for work. This is Andre Duza's Don't F with the Coloureds. This is, again, another very slim novel. Or, excuse me, it's not a novel. It's a short story collection with just 3 short stories. And unfortunately, I'm rating this one 1 out of 5 stars. It was not good. It's just to give you some reasons why. I'll just talk about the first story. The first story is almost like Who Framed Roger Rabbit. These cartoon characters exist in our world, and like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, they kind of work in cartoons, but it's not clear whether humanity knows about these toon characters or they don't know, and how much does society know about these things. It's very unclear. At the beginning of the book, we have this incident at this nursing home, and it's this violent incident. Then we shift to the cop's perspective, and then we shift to a transcript of a TV movie on this violent incident. Then we switch to a historical account of these toon characters, and then we follow this character that was involved in that history and what he's doing in modern day, and then there's an actor that's on the run, and the toons are after. This is all in 30 pages. It's nuts. It just changes the channel every 3 seconds. Not very good. The other 2 stories weren't that great. There was a couple cool moments throughout these stories, but overall, 1 out of 5. Really disappointing. Next up, and I do have a physical copy of this. I've already talked about this book. This is Richard Laymon's Endless Night. I read this for the Wasted Weekend booktube event created by Criminale. I will leave a link somewhere. I don't know where these links are going to show up. But check this video out. I won't say much about it. Overall, I'm rating it 3 out of 5 stars. I do have my problems with it, but the beginning was excellent, and it has a really cool kind of gimmick where it's a third-person narrative following the heroes, and then we switch into a first-person narrative as we follow the villain of the story. So, decent. It's a decent extreme horror book. If you're into extreme horror, you might want to check this one out. It's definitely disturbing. Next up, we have another Dungeon Crawler Carl book by Matt Dinniman. Of course, this is the Dungeon Anarchist's Cookbook. I will say this one has a great finale. Excellent boss battle in the end. The level is very creative. It has to do... This is, I think, level 4 in the dungeon. And it's kind of a... almost like a big underground subway train system that's this big spaghetti maze. And that's what they have to navigate. And they have to try to exit the level and reach the end. I will say the problem I had with the first book were sometimes the environment was, in my opinion, was not sufficiently described in an interesting way where I could really see it in my head. I had that complaint about the first book. I have my complaint about this one. Sometimes I wonder, like, what is this thing? what does this tunnel look like? It's not really describing it too well. What kind of subway station are they in? So sometimes, yeah, the descriptions were a little bit lacking. And also the author at the beginning of the book writes a note saying, hey, this one might get confusing towards the end with what they have to do. But just, it's okay. You don't have to understand everything. And while I get that, I sometimes have been reading these books, if there's a lot of exposition or they're explaining, okay, to pass this level, we got to grab the shiny thing and beat the no. I kind of sometimes might tune out, but I do think that's a problem. If you have to state that at the beginning of your book, it's a little, I think that's a problem. But overall, still 3 out of 5 stars. But at this point, again, if I had to combine these books, I think they're greater than the sum of their parts. I'm having a lot of fun with the series. I'm currently reading book 4 now. I would probably rate them all together as maybe 4 out of 5, just based on the fun entertainment factor alone. Next up, we have, I do have a physical copy of this. When my wife went to Half Price Books to go find a mystery novel to read, I saw this on the shelf. It is Dirty Harry #1, Duel for Cannons by Dane Hartman. I saw this on the shelf. I thought it was just a really cool, maybe I'm not collecting these, but it could be a cool collector's item. This is by Warner, the Men of Action books by Warner Books. I like Dirty Harry. It's very short. I figured, all right, well, I'll just sneak this in there in between my longer books. Unfortunately, it was not good. I'm giving it 1 out of 5 stars. It's fairly nonsensical. Dirty Harry, I won't go into too much detail, but Dirty Harry finds himself on an adventure in San Antonio, and it's kind of odd. The fact that he's not in San Francisco, it feels like like an episode of the Brady Bunch or something. When they go out, they go to an amusement park somewhere, and the episode is shot on location, and it's like, ooh, it's like a special episode. They're outside of the set. That's kind of what this feels like. There are some moments here and there that are kind of interesting in the action scenes, but overall, it's just kind of nonsensical action. Or the story is pretty nonsensical. There's not a lot of motivation given by the villains. It has to deal with these gangsters that take over the San Antonio Police Department. There's no motivation, I think, given. I mean, they're bad because they're bad, and the bad guys are going to be bad. So there's an ally that's introduced, and he never shows up again. Dirty Harry sleeps with the ally's wife. Why? I think he's just meeting her for the first time. I think it doesn't make any sense. And then at the end, they sneak in his famous quote. I know what you're thinking. Did he fire 6 shots or only 5? That speech. This is a .44 Magnum speech, and they use that, but it's used in like a tacked-on kind of silly way, and doesn't even make sense. It's Harry has the .44 Magnum pointed at him, so why is he saying it could blow your head clean off? Anyway, the book is so bad, you start to think about stuff like that. So it's not very good. It's a cool item. It's got really interesting artwork. I love the way it looks. Cool item, but not a good story. A bit disappointing. Next up, we have The Cipher by Kathe Koja. This is the second Kathe Koja novel book I've read. This is kind of an extreme horror. You might consider this splatterpunk. It's very surreal. The first book of hers that I read was called Strange Angels, and I read that book a couple years ago when I was on an extreme horror kick. And that book, I was disappointed in Strange Angels because though it got weird at the end, it didn't get sufficiently weird or horrific. That being said, I thought the novel was excellent. So I immediately thought, all right, Kathe Koja, I'm going to read something else at first. So I finally did. And this book, I almost had kind of the opposite criticism. The weirdness starts on page 1. It's only not very long. It's a little over 200 pages. And the story is about this guy. He's an alcoholic guy that works in a video store. And this girl that he hangs out with, this scuzzy bartender girl that he hangs out with, they're hanging out in their nasty, scuzzy apartment. He's addicted to alcohol, and they find this black hole in a storage closet in the apartment building, and they just like to throw things down into it, and they become obsessed with it. And it's kind of gross, and it smells, and it can like reanimate dead flies. So it's really weird. So the weirdness happens right on page 1, and it's written in a stream of conscious style, which is, I mean, Kathe Koja, I think she has a way with words. I really like her prose in Strange Angels, which is written in a slightly more conventional style. But here, the stream of conscious, I'll admit, it got tedious. And though it's not very long in the last 3 chapters, not a lot is happening. And it's a lot of kind of tedium. Yes, there's that scuzzy, gross factor, which is consistent throughout the whole book. There's a very heavy scene where the main character almost commits suicide. It's very well done. And the book does make you feel like, oh, this book is about addiction. It's very obvious what the book is about. But yeah, this is disappointing. But unlike Strange Angels, where I was slightly disappointed by it, but I loved it, I'm just flat out disappointed by this, unfortunately. I still want to read more Kathe Koja. I still think she has a really interesting way of words. So I'll be looking for more books from her. But this one was disappointing. I'm giving it 3 out of 5, but it's a disappointing 3 out of 5. Next up, we have the final novel I read for February. And this was... I'll leave a link to my video on this one. I've already made a video on it. This was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's A Study in Scarlet. This is the first Sherlock Holmes novel. And I read this for the Holmes is Where the Heart Is booktube event. I just had time with the last couple days of February to read one more novel, and I decided to put one novel in for that booktube event. I didn't follow the prompts for Holmes is Where the Heart Is. I just picked the first Sherlock Holmes novel. I really liked it. The middle of the book, as I say in my video, it is a bit jarring as we go back in time and change the setting. It becomes an American Western for a couple chapters. But the writing is really good. I like his prose. I love the characters of both Holmes and Watson. And I'm excited to read more Sherlock Holmes. I might, as we read mystery novels in March, maybe I'll read the next Sherlock Holmes novel, Sign of the Four. Maybe I'll read a short story collection from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Or maybe I'll read something else. Agatha Christie. I don't know. Who knows? But that's my 10 novels for February. March, I will not be reading as much. I have March of the Mammoths that I want to participate in. I have a video, which again, somewhere I'll leave a link to. So you can look at the candidates for that. That's my reading probably will slow down in March. But those are my 10, and that is all for now. Thank you.